We'll make a start. So we'll kick off this afternoon with Dr. Alan Ruddock. Alan's going to be talking about, obviously, Professor Edward Winter, who sadly passed away this summer. I'm sure everybody's has fond memories of Ed, and obviously these are Alan's thoughts on him and experiences of working with him. So I'll hand over to Alan.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thanks for the introduction, and that was a very nice introduction to Edward as well. In true Professor Winter style, I'm going to start my stop clock, and I'm going to try and finish bang on 15 minutes. So off we go. So yeah, as Marcus just mentioned, we lost a giant of a man over the summer who impacted so many people's lives in such a positive way and had a huge contribution across physical education and sport and exercise sciences. And what I want to present today is not a traditional tribute per se. I mean, we have lots of excellent formal tributes to Edward, like this one written in the Journal of Sport Sciences, and lots of informal tributes across social media such as Twitter, and then an absolutely wonderful piece that was led by Professor Rob Copeland that we published on the Open Science Framework. And if you haven't already had the chance to go ahead and read that, I really would encourage you to do that. So it's a really, really nice tribute to Edward's life and his contribution to sport and exercise sciences and Sheffield Hallam University. And as part of the tribute, which I was kindly asked to contribute to, I would start scribbling down some notes and some stories of Edward that I had, and the lessons that he taught me started weaving their way into the narrative of the story. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to try and capture some of these lessons in some particular way? And hence was born Winter's Principles of Sport and Exercise Science, which I distributed in an email a few weeks ago. So if you haven't already had the chance to read this, it will be somewhere in your inbox from a few weeks back. It was a really enjoyable piece to write. I absolutely loved writing it right from the very start, when I was thinking about Edward and all the lessons that he taught us. And I probably wrote about 30 or 40 different things down, going between some of his seminal papers and some of the lessons I just had etched inside my brain over the years I've known him. And we came up with 15 principles. It's probably a major distillation of his work, but it's something that I think has a lot of cross discipline application. So these are the principles of sport and exercise science, and I think the first thing to consider is, well, what is science? And actually, even before we consider that, is you'll note throughout the presentation that there are some red handwriting style text, and I like to think of this as Edward's handwriting throughout the presentation, certainly. I think many of us have sent pieces of work to Edward for his comments and insight, or even for editing, and my work has just come back completely plastered in red handwriting, to the point where I'm just like, oh, you might as well just write this for me, Edward, because the amount of revisions that I've got to do are just extensive. But that is one of the most effective ways in which he could pass on his teaching. So science can be thought of systematic inquiry, or more simply of just a way of working, and it's characterized by those 7 steps that I highlighted on the slide there. And I could spend hours going to each one of those points there, but really it's just a systematic inquiry and a way of working. Now let's have a think about what sport and exercise science is. And Edward defined it as the scientific study of factors that influence the ability to perform exercise, and not discounting the importance of psychology and nutrition, which probably aren't represented as much as they could have been on this slide. These are some of the major components that that Edward taught us in physiology, right from the neuromuscular system and the structure and ultrastructure of muscle, which I found absolutely fascinating, to the physiological components of energy generation and how that energy is then translated through mechanics towards performance and exercise. Now, exercise is an interesting term, and it's been defined a few times. And one of the definitions is that it's a planned, structured, and repetitive bodily movement. And the key thing I want to highlight here is that Edward would often ask us to identify key terms and really try and define what they mean. And I think that has a lot of cross-discipline importance here. And the key term here is movement. Now, I would consider that a crucifix in gymnastics would be exercise, yet there's no movement there, and movement is actually penalized. So Edward defined exercise in a different way after investigation, and he defined it as a potential disruption to homeostasis by muscle activity that is either exclusively or in combination concentric, isometric, or eccentric. Now, the first three principles are really, really important, because as scientists, we should be encouraged to investigate the terms that we use and the definitions of the terms that we use and their mechanical origins. And I see this a lot in physiology and a lot in fitness training, is that we use sometimes 10 different ways to explain the same concept. And it gets very confusing, not just for us as scientists, but if we think further down the chain into the public domain, there's so much confusion. And I don't think we're that good as scientists as singing from the same hymn sheet and reading from the same page. And so definitions are really, really important. And as scientists, we're bound by the SI unit. Okay, we need to pay due diligence to the mechanical constructs of elements such as force and work, and especially of power, and make sure we're using correct terms and nomenclature. And I think that has a lot of cross-discipline application as well, and just to investigate what terms we're using and whether or not they're the right terms. One of the most misapplied or misunderstood terms is the term contraction to describe the function of muscle. Now, back in the 1600s, a Dutch scientist called Swammerdam, with his frilly cuff, sought to investigate Galen's function by expansion theory. And so he dissected frog muscle and isolated it in a sealed glass tube. And then at point E, suspended a water droplet towards the top of that capillary tube. He then innervated the frog muscle. And if Galen's function by expansion theory was correct, that water droplet would move up. However, when it was innervated, it didn't move at all. And so he disproved that theory, but also importantly, and often it was missed, this has been missed quite a bit in the literature, is that the volume of the muscle did not change. The water droplet did not drop at all. It did not fall. And so the muscle did not contract. So the function of muscle is to exert force, and it does so by attempting to shorten. And there are other terms such as workload and work rate that we really need to think about in sports sciences. And I'm sure there's other terms in other disciplines as well that aren't necessarily the correct term, the term that we should be using. So workload is imprecise. Work rate means power when you really look into the definitions as well. And there's a really fantastic Bobby Dazzler of a book, as Edward would describe it. So if you really want to get stuck into the quantities and units and how you should represent those as symbols, and that's been produced by the Royal Society. So I really do recommend you go have a look at that if you're interested in that kind of thing. But quite often we don't need to get so fancy with our interpretations, and we can use simple metrics. And hopefully what you can see building is that simplicity and clarity were really at the forefront of Edward's thinking and teaching as well. Sometimes all we need is time, distance, and speed to describe and assess, but also to explain performance as well. And there's some terms that are, such as power, that are useful in certain circumstances, but often there's an infatuation with the term that is then misapplied. And I know that's a battle that Edward had for a few years. And nearly all of us will have to formalize our investigations in the form of writing. And there's no reason why we can't strive for precision, clarity, and conciseness with our writing. And there's a great editorial, there's a couple of great editorials in the Journal of Sports Sciences where Edward highlights some of the imprecision and some of the ways in which authors tend to write things that might not necessarily lend itself well to communication. So we need that communication to be as clear and as simple as possible. One of the terms that is used throughout science a lot is the word significance. And we really need to define what we mean by significance when we use this term. Do we mean precision? Do we mean the number of significant figures? More often, we're talking about significance in the sense of statistical significance, but that shouldn't be confused with meaningfulness. Now, most of us in sport and exercise sciences will undertake some kind of intervention, and we want to know whether that intervention works, but we also want to know how well that intervention works as well. Does it exceed the minimum important difference or smallest worthwhile change? And how
So Alan, if you're still there, would you want to reshare your screens and hopefully pick up somewhere about where you left off?
I'm back. I don't know what happened. I think the shoe service took a disliking to me. One of Edward's lessons was that the clock never stops. However, I've stopped my stop clock at 12 minutes and 8 seconds. So we'll see if I can still finish on 15 minutes with that little bit of an intermission. Okay, let's go. So what you can see throughout the whole of the presentation, I hope, is that things should be stated clearly, simply, and unequivocally as well. When I was first invited to review a manuscript, my first peer-reviewed manuscript, I asked Edward for some advice, and he said, "Right, great, describe the study to me." So I described it, and he just said, "So what?" And I scratched my head, and I was like, "What do you mean, so I've just told you?" And he was like, "So what? What's the point?" And he asked me this 5 times until I got to the true meaning of the study, and I passed on my thoughts from Edward's interrogation to the authors, and I think they were thankful for that as well. But everyone's thankful when they get a peer review, aren't they? But outcomes should also, state the so what question, answer the so what question as well. And 2 simple questions define good work. Does the work advance knowledge and understanding? If it does, then it's probably good work. And will the work change practice? If it does, it's probably good work. And if it can do both, then you're probably doing fantastic work. And these 2 questions were really at the heart of Edward's work in the doctoral school and throughout PhD programs as well. And I'm sure you've all been there, and we know of PhD students that think they're changing the world in their particular program of research. Certainly, I've been put into my historical place a few times, but really we do need to appreciate history. And that's really evidence in Principle 14. When we conduct research, we do not subject any participants to any kind of treatments. There is an association here with war crimes against humanity. So in the doc there is Karl Brandt, who was a Nazi doctor and committed of horrific war crimes where they would perform medical experiments without consent. We obtain consent. Our participants volunteer and can withdraw, and we conduct studies according to the Declaration of Helsinki. And I just want to leave with point 15. Remember that everything's already been said before, but since nobody was listening, we have to start again. 14 minutes, 56 seconds with an intermission.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Al. Great. Okay, so yeah, do we have any questions for Al, or have any thoughts people might like to share? I know, Al, whilst you're away, I kind of regaled everybody with I think one of the first lessons that Ed gave to me, and when I started my MSc, is the old water bath experiment. So looking at observer bias. But yeah, great stuff. Okay, well, we'll move swiftly on. I think just sort of conscious of time. So thanks so much for that, Al. Really nice to see that.